Good morning, everybody. This is Diane, and I am very pleased to be able to do a final flip through of these two journals that I've been working on. I didn't really come up with a name for them, so I'm just going to call this one the Map Journal, and this one I'll just call Notes because that's what it says there. I'm not exactly sure what to call that, so it's just going to be Notes. So there's a lot to go through in these books, so I'm just going to get right into it. This is made with a vintage, not very, very old, I don't know the year, Reader's Digest, and it's a smaller one than the ones that we normally see. And it's about 5 1/4 by 7 1/2. The spines on both of them are 2 inches. I use the same fabric, a heavy-duty fabric on both spines, and I use the same trim on both spines. On this one, I use this really pretty blue gimp trim. There's a piece of the map on the back, and this was a raw edge here, and I explained how that happened in a previous video. The clean edge is over here because I put the map on upside down. So the raw edge ended up over here, and I covered it with a piece of Tim Holtz fabric. You will see that there's a lot of Tim Holtz in here, both embellishments and papers and whatnot. So I have done videos where I colored my aluminum frames that came on some of my vintage slides, and they are in my shop if you're interested in acquiring some. This one I colored with a Stays-On ink pad, a blue Stays-On ink pad, and then I stamped on it in black this diamond pattern. Just cut out a 2 by 2 inch square of a map scrap and stuck it in there in place of the slide. This is just a little metal disc that I also put alcohol inks on, and a couple of things cut out of Tim Holtz paper. The maps are Mod Podged on. On the inside cover, I used this pocket cut with Tim Holtz, trying to make sure I go the right way. Tim Holtz stitched slotted die or something like that. It's the die that has all the little slots. And I just put in a bunch of little elements there and added one out here. On the front page of the signature, of each signature, I sewed on a plastic photo sleeve that came out of a photo album that I picked up at Salvation Army. I did want to say that there are no digitals in here except for maybe some embellishments, but I didn't use any digital papers. And I didn't do any sewing except for sewing these photo pockets on. There's a hole up here where this was made to go into a binder, so I added a bulb pin with all these embellishments, a couple of buttons, and this little piece looks like it came off an old necklace. And then I just included some little pieces in the pockets. You can remove them and put in whatever you'd like. This is just a piece of Tim Holtz map paper, scrapbook paper, but it's got a map on it that has a tab with a little stamped label on it. And behind it is a full pocket from here to here. This one is divided. It has room for a negative there in the photo album, so it has a longer card back there. I did a lot of stamping. This one is Charlie Chaplin looking fellows. It's a very old stamp, and so it doesn't stamp very well in the center, but that faded out look goes well with this book. And this is it was a stamp for a lawyer. I got it at a flea market, so I just stamped it very lightly there. And I used a lot of the stamps that I used were Tim Holtz stamps. There's a blue map page, a coffee-dyed glassine craft bag, or page. And this is a page from a vintage book that I have about music clockworks. So it's really cool. This says music novelties here. So I think these are all music boxes. And there's a tab here with an eyelet and a little bulb pin and a dangle. This is one of my older stamps from Stampington and Company. Here's a map page from a vintage book, and I created a pocket with a little coin envelope. I sealed the flap down and just trimmed off the bare edge of the side of it so it could be a pocket. So it's a double pocket. Did some stamping on it. In the back I tucked this vintage tag, which I love. Got that at a flea market. And this old photo of these guys at their fishing cabin, and they've got a whole string of fish there. You could say this is a masculine journal, but I don't really want to bill it as a masculine journal because I wouldn't mind having it, and I'm a very feminine person. There is a little postcard of some orange pickers, but it's definitely not a feminine journal. It doesn't have any lace or fabric. This is a log from a ham radio operator. This one is blank. There are others that have writing on them. And this is Tim Holtz paper. And I cut a little piece off another Tim Holtz paper to make this tuck spot. This was a tag that I had made quite a while ago with some Seven Gypsies paper, and I sandwiched this little loop of twine in there to be a tab pull. And then this is a digital photograph. This little sack I made with my jelly bean die and some Stampin' Up! Paper. Another digital photograph there. Put some burlap behind it. Just did a little collaging. Made a tag out of some leftover Tim Holtz paper. And this is a vintage receipt. I tried to put quite a few vintage pieces in these journals. This is just a little Tim Holtz piece that I just stapled on the edge of the page there, just for fun. A little stamp in the corner. And I paper clipped another old photograph here. On this page, I took 3 little vintage looking flashcards that I cut from Tim Holtz paper and just kind of spread them out like a fan and glued the bottoms. I think I put a little glue up the sides on the end ones just so to make them more secure to put things in, and cut these pieces out of another Tim Holtz paper. Tuck this in. All of these things are Tim Holtz papers. They're not from ephemera packs. They were actually cut from papers, 12 by 12 papers. There's a Tim Holtz stamp and another Tim Holtz stamp, and that's one of my label stamps. I did a little Rita Donnelly flip there. Got a little stamping and collaging on it. There's a vintage flashcard, and this is the journal card that I made in yesterday's video with Tim Holtz paper dolls that I painted and put onto a vintage index card that has a map piece glued to the back, and then just added a couple little embellishments. So there's one of these cards in each signature in both journals. There's another photo from the fishing cabin. You can see the row of fish pinned up to the side of the cabin, and you can see the shadows of the gentlemen as they stand back to take their pictures. I think that's really cool. That's the first signature. This photo sleeve from the same photo album doesn't have the piece for the negative. That was on one side of the page, and then there were 2 photos sleeves. So this one doesn't have the negative spot. So to fill in some space, I added this photo and embellishment. Here's the tag. There's an alarm clock stamped there. Another photo here. I'm not going to take it off, but it's a fellow sitting on a fence. I love those old pictures. There's another tab, and it has another dangle on a bulb pin. This was from a necklace. I got it in a bunch of jewelry at a flea market, and I just took all these metal pieces apart. This was 2 Tim Holtz stamps. I just combined them there. Again, we have one of the coin envelopes that I made into a pocket. It has a vintage receipt tucked in behind it, and this vintage bridge tally card. This piece that I cut from one of my collage masterboard pieces, and this was the stub from the receipt. This is something I made in a recent video, and it was an idea I got from someone else's channel, and I forgot who. But this part is a pocket back here, and it's glued down to the page. It has a vintage vocabulary card. There's a little tablet here that you can write on, and then fold it over and you can clip it so it doesn't flop. There's a little collage here, and this is a vintage flower seed label, French one, that goes in there. And then this is something I printed. I have the actual vintage piece, and I just made a copy of it. It was from a children's activity book. Here is a belly band. I did this on video, and I embossed with copper embossing powder all around the edges to help it stand out from that paper. Just has a little bit of embellishments glued on, and it has a vintage envelope, 1911, and it has a note inside it, and I won't read it. I think it was written to a grandfather. This is a tag that I'd made a long time ago on a video. It's got some piano roll paper as the background, a little stamp, and a glued on piece. This is the other, I didn't show you that side, the ham radio operator page that has writing on it. Can't really see much of this one because I glued a big stack on it that I collaged on with a globe from an atlas and a stamp that says Vagabond Society. Here's another piece that was cut from my masterboard, my collaged masterboard. It's got a little eyelet there. I used a variety of vintage map pages that came out of school books and atlases. This has a little bakery wagon stamp. Another pocket made with the band out cards. I tucked in a genuine vintage milk ticket and this tag that I made. Here's another of the map pages with a Tim Holtz doll. And you can see, if you watched my video yesterday, I was wondering about fading out of the colors. But they stayed overnight, so I guess they're good. And then the third signature, again we have a piece that has the spot for the negatives and some cards tucked in. It's a faint stamp up there, you could journal right over that. This stamp here says Parcel Post. It's actually, it doesn't stamp great, but it's an actual vintage stamp from a post office in Pennsylvania. There's a butterfly on this one. Another belly band. This one has an interesting piece inside. It was something I got at a flea market. It was a collection of, it was like this little drawing set, and it had pictures to trace, and this is a waxy paper. I'm not exactly sure what you were supposed to do with it, but this is what someone drew by laying it on the papers that it came with and tracing. And then you were supposed to do something with them, and I don't know what it was, but there's a piece of plain waxed paper here with it you can play with. This is a Tim Holtz glassine envelope, craft glassine envelope, and I did some stamping on it. I had done this before, it was in my stash. I had done this before, and it was in my stash. I did reinforce the map pages that were more vintage and more fragile. I like this pocket. These are 2 pieces of Tim Holtz papers, cut off pieces, that I turned into this pocket and added this little stamped label. Another of my piano roll tags. It's on file folder. And Tim Holtz photo booth strip. These are really fun journals, and I hope you agree. I just love the book pages and the map pages and all the Tim Holtz elements and the Tim Holtz stamps. And I was able to pull out a pile of scraps and leftovers of Tim Holtz paper and use a lot of it in this journal. Here's another Rita Donnelly flip that's cut bigger. And the last of the map postcards, or index cards. This was why I was concerned about the color fading, because I painted this guy twice with green. His shirt is still yellow, and the coloring of his clothing does look different than the original, but it doesn't show up much. I painted him twice, and it's faded out both times. But his shirt's still yellow. Some of the others, if you saw my video, I used an emery board and lightly rubbed to rub some of the gloss off. But not all of them, and the color stayed. So there is the map vintage junk journal. Next we have Notes vintage junk journal, and I love this cover. This one is bigger. It is 6 1/4 by 9 1/4. You can see the difference in size. Quite a difference. So it just depends on what size journal you like to work in. I love this image that's right here. And I didn't want to cover that with a map. It does have a bit of a map piece down here. The bottom edge of this book was very frayed, and I put a map on the back cover. I like the trim that I put on the edge here. It's a vintage trim. And there's another of the aluminum slides that I colored with alcohol ink this time. The other one was a Stays-On ink pad. This was actually the little bottles of alcohol ink that I dripped out and then stamped, and that's a Tim Holtz photo there. And again, here is one of those slotted pockets with all kinds of goodies tucked inside. Vintage milk ticket right there. This has a vintage zipper pull that I believe came with a bunch of buttons. It's amazing the miscellaneous things that you find when you buy a container full of buttons, vintage ones. So I thought that was a fun thing to add. I love this Tim Holtz map page. In this one, the music box pages are folio instead of half of the page cut folded sideways, because this book was big enough that I just had to trim a little bit, and then I folded in the flaps. So it has a scrap of map paper and one of my digital calling cards, and they are in my shop. This little tab has a pair of scissors and a button on it. Here's a belly band. Now, this has a couple vintage pieces. This is the New York Telephone Company. 1950. It says Ray Loomis. My grandfather's middle name was Loomis. In my dad's family, they took their mother's maiden name and gave it to the son as a middle name. So my grandfather's mother's middle name, or maiden name, was Loomis. So my grandfather's middle name was Loomis, and it's spelled like that. So it makes me wonder. It's in Endicott, New York, which isn't very far from me. And then also tucked in is this envelope, and I did read this letter yesterday. It's quite interesting. It's in bad condition. It's from 1939. You can see it's almost torn, and there are several pages. There's a little fold here where the very bottom line got folded under, so make sure you read that. It says dearest wife, but then it sounds like he's trying to convince her to come back. And then it said, at the end, it says, as ever, your future husband. So maybe they weren't married, but he's trying to convince her to come back, but it's not very loving and romantic. I don't know. I thought it was interesting, so you'll have to read that for yourself. It does have some little bits of vintage cellophane there. Here's a vintage envelope that I added. I just collaged over where the address sticker was. And I love this, where the adhesive was. And inside is a vintage bridge score sheet. Oh, sorry, somebody's texting me. It's something I can look at later. There's a pocket here, and I made this little book out of a scrap of Tim Holtz paper and some other paper scraps. Another Tim Holtz scrap, and this is a vintage French flower seed label. I like this pocket, this fun pocket. I added a die cut label and stamped the paper that's behind it. These are scraps of Tim Holtz paper here with a pretty brad at the top. Here's the Tim Holtz map lady for this. I painted her coat green. I thought it would fade, but it didn't really. It might have faded a little. But I just think it's so fun using the greens and the oranges that are in the map. I used the same stamps on the pages. This is a Tim Holtz milk bottle cap, not a vintage one, but the map piece is vintage. This is an earring. I took it off the fish hook finding and added it to a bulb pin. Another vintage tag like the other journal had, and then this photo. This was from the same collection where the fish photos came from, but it's a lady sitting at an organ. She looks pretty pleased with herself. But it looks like the organ is in some sort of old shed. I'm sorry, that is a group text, and I will respond to it later. I turned the sound off. Tim Holtz piece. This is a real vintage popsicle wrapper, and I put a Tim Holtz cut-off piece inside it. I bought 2 little bundles of them at an antique mall, and I use them sparingly. I love them. This is a digital cigarette card that's in my shop. A vintage photo here. And a vintage milk ticket. Here's one of those waxed drawing papers. And I did some stamping and colorizing of this file folder piece. There's a vintage photo in there. It's a nice sturdy piece. Cute little boy. And my map ladies. And I painted them pretty bright and they didn't fade. I thought that their pink cheeks that looked like clowns would fade, but it didn't. I might be able to add, no, I'm not gonna mess with it. I'll just make it worse. I think they look fun the way they are. This is supposed to be behind. This is a digital photo here. Here's a nice guy in uniform. Vintage photo. This is another piece of that necklace that was in the other book. I love the way this envelope turned out. This is just a plain white envelope with a window, which I bought from Denise at A Tattered Dream a long time ago. So all I did was just use a variety of stamps around the corner, and I love this. It's a Tim Holtz stamp. I love the way it just kind of wraps around that corner. And I just added some other stamps, and I just love the way it turned out. And I put a couple scraps together so that this bingo would be a nice piece to show through the window. Added another couple little pieces cut from Tim Holtz paper. That goes inside behind the window. And then this vintage flash card just gets tucked behind the envelope. And another belly band. And another vintage envelope. This came from Germany, or Sweden. I think Karina sent me this from Sweden. This says Sweden here, but this says Netherlands. But I think it was Karina that sent it to me. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you sent it to me and you're not Karina. I've had it for a long time. I'm finally getting out my vintage stuff and putting them in journals. I mean, I have, but I'm going to do it more consistently now. Another file folder piece that's been collaged and stamped. And here is our map lady. I didn't even paint her because her dress is so dark. A bridge tally card and another color photo, vintage photo that came out of a scrapbook. This is a sack that I collaged on. There's a napkin Mod Podge behind it. This is from a 1943 calendar, this piece. A vintage stamp, a piece of lace, and that's vintage. And this was a scrap of paper. That cardstock that I turned into a tag. This is all Tim Holtz scraps, except for that label, which was a stamp. Stamped it on a vintage math book page. Oh, and this is a little digital label. And this is a larger cutoff piece from Tim Holtz paper. I folded it and rounded the corners and glued it on as a pocket, but you can open it up and write on that grid. And then in this pocket, or in this tag, is this, one of my very precious 1800s handwritten receipts. This is dated 1862. And it's one of my Jacob Biles receipts. If you had followed me over the summer when I picked up these several batches of great vintage ephemera receipts and all kinds of things that I got from two different families. Oh, this is another vintage envelope from Karina also, 1942, and it was paper clipped here. I love this rusty paper. This is from one of those Colourback paper pads that I picked up at Walmart, and I thought that was good to add on the end papers. I love the colors and the corrugated metal and the rust. It's on the front too. I just didn't talk about it there. So that's it. 2 really fun journals incorporating a lot of Tim Holtz papers and ephemera, and also some vintage ephemera, and quite a bit of handmade ephemera also that was in my stash. Some of it I made just for this journal, these journals, and some I pulled out of my stash of ready-made handmade items. So these are in my shop right now, and I hope that you guys really like these as much as I do, and that you'll go over and take a look at them in my shop. Oh, I wanted to point out this on this cover. Kind of looks like a watermark. It almost looks like, I just ran Mod Podge over the whole cover. It's a fabric cover, and it looks like the Mod Podge didn't, like it was resist here, but it wasn't. It's got Mod Podge on it. It's just got like a water stain on it, which I think is really cool. I like it. I just want to make sure you were aware of that. So these are in my shop. Come on over and take a look. I've got some other fun items there as well. I hope you will give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment and share it with somebody who might like to see it, and just help give my channel a boost. I feel like it's sagging a bit, so I could use a boost. Thanks so much for your attention, and I will see you in the next video. Have a creative day today. Bye bye.